Chapter 14. The new method. In addition to the methods of applying suggestive therapeutics mentioned in the preceding chapters, in which the cells, organs, and parts of the body are reached through the general subconscious mind of the patient, there is another form in which the suggestions are directed immediately to the cells themselves. This method, while far from being favored by the majority of the authorities on the subject, and open to the objection of being but mask suggestion in which the apparent direct application is by a fanciful form of arousing the activities of the cells via the subconscious mind, nevertheless has attracted great attention from a number of earnest experimenters who have obtained very satisfactory results through it, and is therefore worthy of respectful consideration. The theory underlying this direct method of applying suggestion to the cells and organs is based upon the general working hypothesis of the existence of mind in the cells and parts, which mind is capable of becoming aware of the desire, will or mental pictures, or whatever we choose to call it, in the mind of the person giving the suggestions. In other words, the cells or parts may be made conscious of or aware of the state of mind of the suggester. It is not necessary to indulge in suggestion and autosuggestion. Any special metaphysical theory or belief regarding the nature of these cell minds, in order to practice this form of healing. It is sufficient for the purpose to rest content with the pragmatic idea that it works, that is, that the application of the method in question tends to arouse the cells, organs, or parts in renewed activity and normal functioning. While the effect of this method of suggestion is heightened by the employment of words, it is not necessary to assume that the cells or organs understand the words. The probability is that the words serve merely to intensify the mental state of the suggester, and to enable him to concentrate his mind upon his work. But whatever may be the explanation of the method or means whereby the cells, organs, or parts become aware of the intentions and desires of the suggester, experiments seem to show that they do become aware of the same, and respond thereto in varying degrees. Moreover, the cells, organs and parts seem capable of being trained to become sensible of the suggestions, and to respond thereto in a greater measure. Waiving all theories or explanations, it may be said that the cells, organs, and parts of the body act as if they were aware of the treatment being given them, and the suggestions being directed to them. Whether we assume that there is a direct channel of communication between the mind of the suggester and the cells, organs, or parts, or whether we fall back upon the idea that the channel is really through the general subconsciousness and that the direct suggestions operate merely as a striking method of applying suggestion through the ordinary channels, the fact remains that in giving and taking these treatments excellent results may be obtained by assuming, even conditionally, that the cells, organs or parts are entities capable of understanding the suggestions and responding thereto. And, whatever may be the details of the real reason of the process, the general fact remains that there is mind in the cells, organs, and parts, that is somehow, someway, aroused and which responds to the suggestive influence. The new method. The method of application of this form of suggestion is simplicity itself. All that is necessary is that the suggester arouse the attention of the cells, and then address them as if they were entities. These cells or organ entities vary in degree of intelligence, not only so far as is concerned the differences between the personality of their owners, but also in the matter of differences in themselves. The cells in the liver differ from the cells in the heart or stomach, for instance. These cell minds resemble the minds of children, very young children, in fact. There must be something done to arouse their attention, and then to hold their interest. This being done, they must be spoken to authoritatively, and firmly, with constant repetition and insistence. They must be told what to do, and they must be held up to their work by insistent command and demand. The successful practitioner of this form of suggestion must needs possess and display many of the characteristics of the successful school teacher of the lower grades. In an earlier work on this subject, we said, the way to reach the mind in the cells, cell groups, ganglia, organs, nerves, parts, etc., of the body, is to address yourself directly to it, just as you would to a person. You must think of the mind in the affected part, as a person who is misbehaving. You must remonstrate with, argue with, coax, order, or drive the person residing in the organ, just as you would different individuals. Sometimes coaxing is much better than driving, and sometimes the forceful method is necessary, as we shall see. You may either talk aloud to the mind in the organ, or else, and this is the better way in treating others, you may do your talking mentally. Tell the cell mind just what you expect of it, just what you intend it shall do, just what is right for it to do, etc. And it will obey. In this statement is contained the essence of this method of applying suggestion. The rest is merely a matter of detail. In this form of treatment, many practitioners begin by using the hands to tap lightly or sharply over the affected organ or part, which seems to arouse something akin to attention. This suggestion and auto-suggestion seems to be needed particularly at first until the cells get used to you. The idea seems to be akin to that put into effect when we tap a man on the arm or shoulder, to attract his attention from the many sights and sounds around him. It is as if we tapped over the organ, saying, "Hear you. Wake up. Listen to me," in a firm authoritative manner. It is like the tap of the gavel on the speaker's desk in Congress, or the tapping of the teacher's gong in school, or the military command of attention. It operates precisely in the same way, and in the same way there is noticed an acquiring of the habit of coming to attention on the part of the organ or cells, after a few treatments. Personally, we are of the opinion that the use of the hands in certain forms of treatment has a similar effect, and that much of the after details of these various manual treatments act along the lines of suggestion. After having aroused the attention of the cell, organ, or part, the suggester proceeds to talk to it, using forcible suggestions. Quoting from our former work referred to, a plain, simple way of giving this treatment is to awaken the attention of the mind in the cell, organ, or part, as above stated, and then proceeding to mentally lecture it, calling it by name, as for instance, here, stomach, or now, you liver, etc. Don't smile at this advice, just try it on yourself, and you will stop smiling. Then go on and tell the organ mind, just what you would tell it if it were an actual personality, a childish mind for instance. You will soon find how quick the organ mind is to awaken to your words, and to act upon your suggestions or orders. Follow the law of suggestion in giving these treatments to the organ minds, that is, remember the suggestive phases of repetition, authoritative demand, or command, etc. Don't be afraid, but start in to give the organ mind a piece of your mind, and it will obey you. There are no fixed forms of treatment along these lines. You must acquire the knack by practice. The proper words will suggest themselves to you. The thing to do is to know what you want done, and then to command the organ mind to do that. The new method. Thing, using the same words that you would use in talking to a real person in the place of the organ. You will soon acquire the art, by a little practice. Those who have treated a large number of persons in this way have told me that the mind in the organs and parts seem to instinctively recognize the healer's power over them. Just as a horse or dog will recognize men who are accustomed to managing animals of their kind, so will these organ minds recognize their master in one who has practiced the art of healing along these lines. All who have practiced this form of suggestive healing, bear testimony to the fact that there are great differences in the degrees of intelligence in the various organs, and also great differences in the nature or disposition of the various organs. For instance, the heart is found to be quite intelligent and amenable to reasonable suggestion, encouragement, and control. The liver, on the contrary, is always found to be a heavy, sluggish, stubborn, mulish, obstinate entity, which yields only to sharp and vigorous commands and driving. As one person once said to us, the liver is a mule, and must be treated as such, and we agree perfectly with this statement. There is just as much difference between a spirited horse, and a mulish mule, as between the heart and the liver. Accordingly, there must be a difference in the treatment applied to these parts. The one needs but a little gentle patting and urging, while the other needs the big stick. The stomach occupies a position between the two, possibly the position of a draft horse. When not brutalized with stuffing and overwork, the stomach is a very faithful, hard-working organ. It has a tendency to become frightened at adverse suggestions, and is rendered weak by fear. But it may be encouraged and restored to normal functioning by this method of treatment. It responds to trust, encouragement and reassurance, and has a desire to perform tasks expected of it, if fear is taken away from it. A peculiar thing about the stomach is that it seems to like jollying or flattery tell it how good a stomach it is, and how well it can. Suggestion and autosuggestion. Do its work, and how much you trust it to run things right for you, and lo, it proceeds to make good and to justify your praise and commendations. The nerves respond readily to this form of treatment, along gentle coaxing lines. The circulation of the blood may be increased in certain parts, or restrained, in this way. In this way the blood may be swept all over the body, creating a pleasant glow, or it may be drawn away from an aching head, or a feverish brow. The bowels respond readily to a firm, kind treatment, in which they are told to move regularly, it being well to name a certain time at which you expect them to establish a regular habit, in which case be sure to keep your appointment with them, and give them a chance. The organs peculiar to women will respond readily to this form of treatment. Regular menstruation has often been established by treatments of this kind, given a month ahead, and keeping it up every day until the regular period, in this case the fixing of a date being an important detail. Suggestions of firm and strong have relieved many cases of weakness of the uterus. Profuse menstruation has yielded to the commands of slow, easy, not too free a flow, etc. The method considered in this chapter may be applied either along the lines of ordinary suggestion given by one person to another, or along the lines of autosuggestion or self-treatment, in which the suggestions are given by the person himself direct to the minds in the cells, organs, or parts, just as if one were treating another person. Part 3. Autosuggestion. Suggestion and autosuggestion. Chapter 16. Autosuggestion. B. Why autosuggestion is meant: the application of the principles of suggestion by oneself upon oneself. In autosuggestion the individual plays the dual role of suggester and suggeste, respectively. In all other respects it is precisely the same thing as suggestion in its general phases. In autosuggestion may be found the suggestion of impression, the suggestion of induction, the suggestion of association, which are found in the ordinary phases of suggestion. In autosuggestion may be noticed the 5 phases of suggestion, viz., suggestion of authority, suggestion of association, suggestion of habit, suggestion of repetition and suggestion of imitation, respectively. It may seem strange to think of one suggesting to oneself with authority, but it is true that if one will use the authority of his will, he may impress upon his subconsciousness such suggestions as he may wish to place there, and may thus make over his entire character, or develop within himself the qualities which he may desire. In the same way he may force associations upon his mind by suggestion, and thus produce the same effect upon himself as those produced by associative suggestions from without. One may suggest habits of thought. Suggestion and autosuggestion. Action and feeling upon himself, just as truly as habits may be induced by suggestions from without. As for the suggestion of repetition, it will be found that this phase of suggestion plays a most important part in autosuggestion. Even suggestion of imitation plays its part in autosuggestion, for one may suggest to himself that he will imitate others, emulate them, pattern after them, model upon them, if he so desires. In short, in autosuggestion we find that we have suggestion in all of its many phases and forms, the only difference being that the individual gives the suggestions to himself, instead of receiving them from outside sources. The study of autosuggestion is really the study of suggestion. Those authorities in the new psychology who analyze things to their ultimate elements, rightly hold that the active principle of all suggestion is really autosuggestion. That is to say, that the active force manifested in suggestion, is really called into play by the individual himself, usually involuntarily. When we accept a suggestion from outside, We allow it to pass the portals of our reason and judgment into the workshop of our will, there to set into motion the machinery of our mind. We allow our reason and judgment to neglect their duty, and to thereby admit undesirable strangers to our mental workshop. In autosuggestion, as the term is generally applied, we voluntarily select and choose the suggestions which we wish to impress us, and we add to their effect by repetition and attention. But in both suggestion and autosuggestion the principle employed is precisely the same. The power is entirely within the mind of the person himself, although it may require the assistance of some outside person to call it into effect. The suggestionist drives away fear and inspires confidence and expectant attention, and then leads and directs the will of the patient in the direction of performing the physical cure. Or he uses suggestion in one or more of its phases, in order to induce the person to accept and believe what he says or does, and thereby gains the same effect as if the person had reasoned out the matter and autosuggestion impressed it upon his own mind. Suggestion from outside is the use by another of one's mental tools and machinery, while autosuggestion is the use of the same tools and machinery by oneself. It is difficult to draw a dividing line between the phenomena of suggestion and that of autosuggestion. They blend into each other in many subtle degrees. For instance, one may receive an impression from outside, an impression which is the effect of a suggestion from outside, and being impressed by it, he may think it over and think and feel about it, so that the idea takes a firm hold upon him. Up to this point it is suggestion in its general phase. But, then he repeats the suggestion to himself, both in self-communion and in conversation with others, until he has made an impression much deeper than that caused by the original impression. This secondary effect is autosuggestion, of course. There is another form of autosuggestion which is overlooked by many of the authorities. We refer to cases of involuntary autosuggestion, cases in which the person impresses suggestions upon himself without intending to do so. We may illustrate this last mentioned phase by the tale of the man who tells a fish story so often that he gets to believe it himself. Although the story may have had but little basis in fact, the constant, earnest repetition of it with the intention of impressing it upon others, acts as a repeated autosuggestion which impresses itself upon the subconscious mind until it becomes a fixture there. Everyone who reads these words will be able to recall cases of this kind in his own experience. The above-mentioned form of autosuggestion finds an illustration in the cases of many men whose business or profession finds them engaged in exploiting certain sophistries or half-truths, which are so known to them in the beginning. These tales told repeatedly for a period of time become actual truths to these persons by reason of autosuggestion, and they fall victims to their own suggestive power. There are many suggestion and autosuggestion instances of charlatans and religious impostors who finally fell victims to their own repeated suggestions, coming to actually believe the tales which they invented to impress others. We have a personal knowledge of a case in which an owner of a celebrated patent medicine purporting to cure nervousness, and who wrote his own startling advertisements in which he claimed all symptoms as indicating nervousness, finally falling a victim to his own suggestive imagination and becoming a hypochondriac filled with fears of symptoms and possessed with the idea that he was a nervous wreck. We believe that a celebrated religious impostor, now dead, fell a victim to his own claims of divine inspiration and power, and became mentally unbalanced by reason thereof. In fact, it is a common and well-known fact in the history of new religions that many of the leaders of such movements become mentally unbalanced by the constant repetition of their tales of inspiration, special divine guidance and the rest of it. Writers along special lines often have a hard fight to avoid being overcome with the autosuggestions made easy by reason of their constant statements of certain special things. Experts on insanity frequently become insane. Writers upon certain forms of disease are often affected by their own statements, constantly repeated. Salesmen become impressed with certain tales told about their particular goods, that if they happen to change employers the old autosuggestions are very hard to overcome. Fanaticism and bigotry arise often from the constant statement of certain beliefs to others, acting as autosuggestion. In short, that which we constantly repeat to ourselves, and others, tends to become a fixed impression in our minds, difficult to eradicate, and often influencing us to a great extent. This being the case, we should avoid influencing ourselves along these undesirable lines, and should always try to impress ourselves with desirable qualities and ideas. We have the power of intelligent choice in this matter. There is no excuse for not using it properly. Autosuggestion. Many of the cures claimed by suggestion in its many forms, are really due to the autosuggestion of the patient, pure and simple. Of course, all mental cures have the element of autosuggestion largely in evidence, but in some cases we can say that autosuggestion does all the work. For instance, we have frequently heard mental healers relate cases in which patients wrote to them for absent treatment, and received results even before the healer received the letter requesting treatment. Leaving out of the question, entirely, all discussion of the virtues, merits, and explanation of absent treatments, it must be admitted that in the cases mentioned there was no absent treatment whatsoever at the time, and that the entire benefit arose from the autosuggestion of the patient. In one case, the healer tells that the patient's original letter was misdirected and went astray, and that the first that the healer knew of the matter was the receipt of a second letter, a month later, in which the patient testified to the wonderful effect of the month's treatments that she supposed she was receiving. The cure was not an imaginary one either, for investigation revealed a case in which the physicians held that there was a chronic condition beyond cure, and that the patient had been perfectly restored to health. Of course, we have heard of explanations of these cures, to the effect that in some way the subjective mind of the patient seeks the subjective mind of the healer, in the ether, and there receives the treatment. This may be all true. We cannot prove that it is not, but autosuggestion affords a much simpler explanation. If the patient had pinned her faith on the bones of Saint Anne, or some other object, to the same extent that she believed in the healer, she would have received the same result. All experience and investigation proves this. These cases bear all the evidences of cases of autosuggestion. In this connection, we may add that the recital of these cases, and the subjective mind meeting in the ether, has injured the business of certain absent healers, for their patients' finding. Suggestion and autosuggestion. That they can receive this subjective mind treatment without paying for it in the regular way, now do not write to the healers at all, but simply make the etheric connection, and receive the treatment, free of charge and without the knowledge of the healers. Surely this is a case of psychic wiretapping needing the attention of the authorities. To the student of autosuggestion, all of these wonderful things are found to be very simple at the last analysis, and to rest upon the firm foundation of pure psychology. And in the same category may be placed the strange cases which the scoffing public would dismiss as only imagination. Autosuggestion is a potent force, which works great harm to persons who misuse it, or who use it ignorantly, but which is equally potent for good when rightly and intelligently employed. It is a most valuable mental instrument or tool, with which we may make of ourselves what we will. It lies very close to the heart of the new psychology. Chapter 17. Self-impression. As we have said in the preceding chapter, the person practicing autosuggestion is both the suggester and suggeste. He plays a dual role, viz., 1. The part of the teacher or master, and 2. The part of the pupil or scholar. Auto-suggestion might well be called self-impression, for the latter term correctly describes the actual process. The objective I impresses the subjective me. The conscious region of the mind impresses the subconsciousness. This is the whole thing in a nutshell. The actual process is a case of says I to myself, says I. It is astonishing how the subconscious mind may be trained to work for one by a scientific course of autosuggestion or self-impression. As we have said in a previous work on the subject, one may charge his subconscious mind with the task of waking him up at a certain time in the morning and he wakes up. Or he may charge his mind to remember a certain thing and he remembers it. This form of self-mastery may be carried to great lengths, and one may bid his subconscious mind collect data regarding certain subjects, from amidst its heterogeneous collection of mental odds and ends of knowledge, and then bid it combine the information into a systematic form, and the mind will so act, and the combined information will be at hand. Suggestion and autosuggestion. When needed. I find myself doing this, almost unconsciously, when I start to write a book, fact after fact, and illustration after illustration, appearing at their proper time and place. The field of self-impression or autosuggestion, and the workings of the subconscious mind, have just had their outer edges explored. There is a great field of mentation here awaiting some of you. Autosuggestion may be considered in several phases, although the underlying principle is the same. In the first place, every person has filled his mind with a number of involuntary autosuggestions arising from the repetition of suggestions and impressions originally received from outward sources. These autosuggestions are harbored in the shape of prejudices for and against persons or things, certain fixed beliefs not based upon reason or actual judgment or experience, certain arbitrary associations, and other results of previous impressions which have become firmly fixed by repetition along the lines of autosuggestion. Another phase is that in which the autosuggestion is given and accepted tacitly or by implication, as when one takes a certain medicine believing that it will produce a certain result, in which the suggestion is transformed into autosuggestion by the belief of the person. For instance, if your friend gives you a powder saying that it will tend toward improved digestion, and you believe him, then when you take the powder you will have the following idea: this powder will settle my stomach and cause me to digest my dinner perfectly. Although the idea may not be uttered in spoken words, nevertheless there will be the verbal autosuggestion. In the same way you may give yourself an implied adverse autosuggestion regarding fresh air, or certain foods, and the result is that you experience a bad effect. This form of autosuggestion consists in a firm belief on your part that certain things will produce certain results, or that certain things possess certain qualities, etc. Everyone has a goodly stock of autosuggestions of this type, which exert a self-impression, greater or less effect upon his character and actions. Carried to extreme, they produce fanaticism, bigotry, fixed ideas, or even monomania. Lacking them, the person is apt to be more or less fickle, unsettled, changeable, and uncertain. Much that we have called principles of conduct is based upon this type of autosuggestion heightened by habit. The moral is obvious. The third type or class of autosuggestion is that form of impression which is deliberately and voluntarily impressed upon the subconscious mind by the conscious mind, with and for a particular definite purpose. For instance, you wish to catch a train tomorrow morning shortly after 4 o'clock, you deliberately charge your subconscious mind with the idea awake at 4 o'clock to catch that train, and you find that you will awake from your sleep about that time. You have it on your mind, and you awake. The subconscious mind may be set like an alarm clock. In the same way, a mother's subconscious mind will cause her to awaken at the slightest noise of the babe, while much louder noises will fail to arouse her. You have an engagement at 3 o'clock, and charge your mind with it, and a little before the hour you will find a certain mental uneasiness manifesting itself, and just before the hour the thought will flash into your conscious field of mind, that engagement with Smith at 3 o'clock. It is this phase of suggestion that is actively employed in the character-building processes which form so important a part in the practical work of the new psychology. The new psychology teaches that one may build up any set of brain cells by appropriate lines of autosuggestion and resulting action, which will develop certain desired tendencies and characteristics. Also, one may inhibit or neutralize certain objectionable traits or characteristics by deliberately building up the qualities directly opposed to those of which he desires to be rid. There is nothing occult or mystical about this process. It is based upon the scientific knowledge of the mind and brain. Suggestion and autosuggestion. This last mentioned phase of autosuggestion plays an important part in the methods and practices of the many metaphysical cults and schools, including those of religious cults which use similar methods. The various affirmations, denials, statements, etc., used by these cults and schools are but forms of autosuggestion, and their results are obtained along its lines. Much good work has been accomplished by these organizations and schools in the direction of producing improved mental, physical, and moral conditions. Many a person has been brought out of enfeebled and abnormal physical conditions, many a one has changed his mental states and character of thought, many a person's moral character has been improved by these methods. In spite of the extravagant statements and claims of some of the cults, there has been a great deal of good accomplished by them. They have replaced pessimism with optimism, fear with hope, despair with courage. But it is not necessary to accept any of their theories, dogmas, or creeds, in order to partake of the benefits of the treatments, for an understanding of autosuggestion, and an intelligent practicing of its methods will enable anyone to secure these beneficial results along purely scientific lines. The one possible weak point of the various methods of applying autosuggestion, and one which has not escaped the attention of the critics, is that unless the person understands the underlying principles, there is a tendency toward resting content with the mere lip statement of the autosuggestion, and a neglect to manifest into activity and actual doing the desired quality or power. In the following chapters we shall endeavor to point out an improved plan of applying autosuggestion, in which there is employed a correlated physical activity in connection with the use of the proper autosuggestion. To those who are repelled by the vague metaphysical conception of the cults, and who, while desirous of obtaining the benefits of the methods of autosuggestion, demand some self-impression explanation along purely material lines, we would say that a little examination into the teachings of science regarding the nature and function of the brain will explain the working principle of autosuggestion, along purely physical lines and without recourse to metaphysical theory. Science informs us that the brain is composed of a substance called plasm, which consists of an enormous number of tiny cells which are used in the manifestation of thought. These brain cells are estimated to number from 500 million to 2 billion. According to the mental activity of the individual, there is always a great number of reserve brain cells remaining unused in every brain, the estimate being that even in the case of the most active brain there are always several millions of reserve brain cells at any time. Science also informs us that the brain grows additional brain cells to meet an increased demand. Brain building consists of the development and growth of brain cells in any special region of the brain, for the brain consists of various centers and localities, in which are manifested the various mental faculties, qualities, or functions. By developing the brain cells in any particular region, the quality, activity, or faculty which has that region for its seat is necessarily greatly increased and rendered more effective and powerful. It is a fully demonstrated scientific fact that man may make himself over mentally, if he will but devote the same degree of attention, patience, and work to the subject that he would in case of desired development of some part of the physical body, some muscle or limb, for instance. And the processes are almost identical in the case of muscle and brain cells use, exercise, and practice along the lines of autosuggestion and its correlated activities.